What is up, everybody? Welcome, and thank you so much for your support and for checking out another Zenology Pro video. This is episode 1. If you haven't seen the intro, episode 0, do check that out down below. Today, we are going to talk all about the oscillator section and the structure section. So let's go. All right, so the oscillators and the structure. Now, these are two of the most interesting parts about Zenology Pro, I think. So I'm really excited to talk about them in this video. So let's start. We're going to start real simple with the oscillators. So we talked last time. There are different. There's 4 different partials. So right now we're only going to have one partial active. So you can see that if I click on these, they're all dimmed out. We're only hearing one partial. And this is the initial tone from the PRSTF Essential package. So this is like the bare bones, nothing going on in the filters or the MFX. We're just looking at the oscillators right now. So there are 5 different types of oscillators. So let's just talk about all 5 of them. We'll do an overview real quick, and then we'll get down into detail about how they work and then how they work with the structure section. So you can select which type of oscillator you have by clicking any of these 5 buttons up here. And they are in order of least to most complicated. They are noise, which is real simple. You can't see, but I'm playing notes several octaves apart. That's all up and down the scale. They're pretty much all just the same white noise. This is useful if you want to use one partial to impart some white noise type of stuff into your stuff. You can use filters with this that we'll talk about another time. It can be very useful, but it's more of like a utility oscillator than something that's that interesting, at least to me. The next one is one of my favorites, but it's also super simple. It is a supersaw. It sounds like this. I'm going to turn the wave gain up a little bit so I think it's easier to hear. This is my voice. On the levels, that looks more or less okay. So, maybe up one more. I think that's okay. Okay, so anyway, sorry about that. So, the supersaw is, it's a really common sound in a lot of modern sound design. In the last 10 years or so, this is the sound that you hear in some form or another, and all it is a lot of different sawtooth waves stacked on top of each other with slightly different tunings, and it makes this nice thick, rich sort of sound, and you can do all sorts of stuff with it. You'll hear that sort of thing all the time in today's commercial pop music. I love the sound personally. But it's pretty simple. There's only one setting, which is the detune, which is how much that they're tuned off from each other. And you can see a visual representation of that on the screen. If you bring it all the way down to 0, it sounds like only maybe a couple of sawtooth waves like phasing a little bit, so like really close. And then as you spread it to like halfway, like 70, 80, you're getting this thick, rich sound, and then you go all the way up. It's big and almost on the verge of like breaking apart, but it's pretty cool and really useful for a lot of things. Even as just like the backbone to a sound to get that oomph, that like chordal push behind what you're doing. So that's the supersaw. I should mention, you saw me do it before, but this wave gain parameter, this is separate from the partial level. You can control the partial level in the amp envelope, which we'll talk about in another video. But the oscillator section, you can just change the wave gain, and this can be useful for a couple of different things. I've made some like weird patches for the MC101 and stuff, and sometimes using this like extra gain parameter at the beginning can be really, really helpful in getting what you want out of the whole patch. So that is the supersaw. So that's 2 out of 5. We're doing great. Next up in our simplest to most complicated oscillator is the virtual analog. This is just an opinion, by the way. I don't know that this is necessarily more simple or more complicated, but this is the order that I think of them in. But virtual analog is great. It's what it says it is. And if you're not sure what that means it emulates the early analog synthesizers that did basically at least the East Coast synthesizers that did complicated wave and then used filters to filter it down. That was how analog synthesis was done. Now, virtual analog synthesis is a digital technology, but attempts to emulate those sorts of things. So when you click virtual analog, you'll notice there's a new menu underneath it that gives you a few options. So the first one is sawtooth wave, which sounds like you would expect. If you're looking for sawtooth waves, there's a square wave. Square wave, super good for like chiptune type stuff. I mean, it's a square wave. It does what a square wave does. Triangle. And sine. And if you're familiar with virtual analog synthesis, you might recognize that those four are the standard for virtual synthesis types of waves that you might come across while you're doing virtual analog synthesis. But you notice we have a few more options here. We have ramp, which is this. I'm not 100% sure where this comes from. I think that it comes from some analog synth that Roland has put out in the past that is, I mean, it sounds a lot like a sawtooth wave, but it can be useful in slightly different ways, especially if you're worried about phasing stuff. Let me put the pulse width back. We'll talk about that in a moment. So, okay, so this is the sawtooth wave, and this is the ramp wave. And this is the square. So you can see that they do have distinct characters, so that can be useful. It's another option in your toolkit. Again, similar idea is the Juno wave, which I guess comes from the Juno synths. I'm not 100% sure where it comes from, but it's I guess from the instruction manual, I think it says it's a ramp wave modulated with a square wave, or it's a sawtooth wave modulated with a square wave, which certainly that's what it looks like. And it's got this sort of buzzy little bit of character that doesn't exist on its own in a sawtooth wave or a square wave. So I think that's really neat. I actually use this wave quite a bit. I think it sounds awesome. So that's Juno. We have Triangle 2, which there's Triangle 1. This is just another triangle wave that sounds a little bit buzzy, and I think, again, I've never owned old analog synths, but I think that probably older analog synths, particular analog synths that I'm not completely aware of, probably have triangle waves that sound a lot like this. And you can see on the picture here, there's a little notch at the bottom, which I think is what makes it sound a little bit like buzzier than the Triangle 1. There's then Triangle 3, which has a similar character, but I think a little bit less of it compared to Triangle 2. I just lost my light. I think that's fine, though. You know what? I think that's fine. Sorry about that. We're still recording, though, with the computer, so that's fine. Now you can see the blue glow from my launch pad. That's all right. So anyway, that's Triangle 2, and Triangle 3. This is Triangle 3 compared to Triangle 1 compared to Triangle 2. So you have different versions of triangles. I hope that's enough that you sort of understand. I use these a lot for like basses. I don't know if you'll hear well, but that can be a really good sound with a lot of like sub bass that also has some a little bit more in the high end. And then sine wave 2. Same deal, but with sine waves has this little notch going on here. So if you're just looking for a sine wave sound, but you're like a regular sine wave is boring, let's do something a little bit different, this is a great choice. And that's sort of how I treat the extra triangle and sine wave oscillators. So that's all of virtual analog. No, it's not. I'm sorry. That's all your options for virtual analog waves. However, you have a few more options down here, and they are pulse width, which on a square wave does just what you would think pulse width does, which moves it like this. Gets you that nice pulse width modulating sound. I should mention pulse width modulation depth. LFO2 takes your LFO2 and applies it to this pulse width parameter by whatever amount you set here. So you can hear that. I'm going to lower the rate a little bit so it's easier to hear. And you can hear that modulates it around whatever point you set your pulse width to. So hopefully that's fairly clear. Now, the cool thing is that this pulse width applies to all of the virtual analog oscillators, not just the square. So if we have a sawtooth wave, it goes to a triangle wave, which is actually not super exciting and actually is very similar to what the triangle wave does, but in reverse, which is interesting. The sine wave is pretty cool. Goes from a sine. Get some bite. This can, again, if you want like a sawtooth wave, but like a little bit something different, like this can be fun. It almost sounds like a filtered sawtooth wave, but it's generated this way instead, which is kind of cool. And again, like in the ramp wave, it's pretty neat. Going from the ramp to a sawtooth to like a buzzy sawtooth, which can be good. The Juno one, I like it on the Juno one too. On this end, it's like a heavily compressed square wave kind of thing, and then all the way to just about a saw. Pretty cool. And then works similarly on the extra triangles and sines as it does on the main ones. But again, all these are really good options that I think impart quite a bit of character to what we're doing here, which is the name of the game. So that's all the simple oscillators. Next up, we're going to talk about PCM. So all that PCM sample means is that it's a sample. So the default sample in the default initial tone is called 1 piano 1L, and it sounds like this. Now, I have thoughts about this, thoughts that I've not been able to corroborate in the manual, but my thoughts are that if you were to take one single sample and pitch it all the way to the bottom of your keyboard and all the way to the top of your keyboard, it will sound bad at both ends. And this doesn't sound perfect all the way at the bottom. But it doesn't even sound that bad there. And then for a single sample piano, it sounds pretty darn good. I don't know exactly what's going on here, but I think it's a little bit more than just like an MP3 file or a WAV file getting played here. Also, it holds forever if you hold it. You'll notice a drop in volume, but it's still there. Oh, that re-triggered it. But if I turn it up, right? Right, it's still sustaining. And if you've ever tried to put a sample into a sampler or whatever before, you'll know that that is not how samples work all on their own. So I don't know exactly what's going on here. I think that maybe that's intentional. Maybe Roland doesn't want to share their secrets, but this is a little bit more than just a sample. So that's PCM samples. That is one sample. Now, you'll notice here there's a button that says set stereo and set mono. If you set stereo, you actually you can put 2 samples on one partial and they're panned back and forth. So if I take, this is really good for a lot of different things. These two, the 2 like default piano ones, you'll notice down here is panned a little bit more to the left. I can verify this in the meters that I'm looking at, but I can also hear it a little bit at least. And then if you go up, the high registers are panned more to the right, which is what you would expect if you were sitting in front of a piano. So it's pretty common for piano samples to be panned this way, and it's subtle here. Like you can still, we had only the left sample and you could still hear it plenty high up. But having both of them, especially if you have headphones on, gives a really nice piano experience on just one partial. Which is pretty cool. And that's one partial. That's no reverb, no delay, no filters, no chorus, no nothing. That's just 2 PCM samples for the piano. And I think that's really good. Like, I think that sounds pretty solid for what that is. Now, if you're like, well, maybe I don't want a piano. Maybe I want a different PCM. Well, you are in luck because we have a lot of options for PCM samples that we can load. I only have the first 3 banks, which come with it, but I think you can buy other ones. I think they have special ones that emulate special synths and whatever. But this covers a just a gigantic variety of different things that you can do. I would recommend you sort by category. If you click all and then you want square pulse waves, you can just put in. Note that there's still a piano on the right ear. So if I just set this mono, this one is called MG Square HD, which I assume means it was somehow sampled from a Moog somewhere. P5 Square HD. I don't hear a lot of difference between those, to be honest. But again, I'm not like a hardcore analog synth guy. But so anyway, that's just in the synth category. That's just in the square synth category. You've got sub, you've got digital, you've got synth effects, you've got noise, you got a vinyl noise one. If you're into that sort of thing, you can throw drums on there. There's a lot of options. Then there's the normal ones. There's a lot of different acoustic pianos. You get the picture, right? There's a lot going on here. You get the picture, right? There's a lot going on here. And some of them sound a little bit like corny, cheesy, like little, like silly little. Sorry, let me just adjust. Some of them sound a little bit like older style MIDI or whatever. But on the whole, I think they're quite good. I think they're pretty solid. I really like them, and I think they can put a ton of flavor into whatever you're doing. So that is. And I mean, yeah, you got to go through this yourself. I don't need to sit here and play all of them for you, but there's a lot of choices, and you can always do silly things. Like if you want like a flute on the left, cool, and then on the right, you just click here on the right, and you can pull up. Whatever you want, which is really cool. And then that's you're just using one partial right now. So then maybe I just want to put like a saw wave on the other partial. And I just slide this filter down on the saw wave, but not on the glockenspiel. And suddenly you got something huge already. So yeah, so I mean, I think that being able to put all of these partials into just layer them in with other sounds, I think is really, really, really powerful. And it can really definitely add some character and like uniqueness to the different types of sounds that you're working on, which obviously to me is a huge bonus. So that's PCM, and we've now covered 4 of the 5 options, and the last one is PCM Sync. Now these are all PCM samples, and there's only this many of them, but they are specifically designed for making effects with the structure, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. But just so you can hear them on their own, you've got noises, different qualities of noise. You don't have to use them with the sync structure, even though that's what they're designed for. Like if you just want these types of noise, you can just do that. And I do that sometimes. There's some Xmod waves. Actually, I use some of these vocal waves quite a bit. That's do. There's There's digital, which just they have like little bits of the formant quality going on built into them already, which is kind of cool. You can probably see that on the visualizer that's running there. That's just wave candy, by the way. That thing on the side that's, I guess it's right above my head. That's the lights are going. That's wave candy, which is an image line visualizer. But anyway, you have all of these, and the point of them is that you can, in this structure section. So there's right now it's off. And the structure works between 2 oscillators, or between 2 partials. So between partial 1 and partial 2, that's what this setting is. And then over here is the setting between partial 3 and partial 4. So these can either sync to each other, which is a hard sync effect, which is, I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe every time I'm just going to pull up a waveform here that you can sort of look at. But every time this wave crosses 0, it resets the wave of the other, whatever, like the other oscillator is. So like if this is partial 1, if you have partial 1 sync to partial 2, every time partial 2 crosses this threshold, it will reset partial 1, and that will give a different character to the sound. So this sync property only works if partial 1 and partial 2 are either virtual analog or PCM sync. That's how it works, and that's why the PCM sync ones are here. But if you pick like a PCM sync and then partial 1, but you don't need this. And you can make a lot of weird sounds with it. This is grayed out because it's not because partial 2 isn't getting played, but it's still affecting partial 1. Like if I turn this off, you just hear a saw wave. If I turn it to sync, you hear it synced, reset by these guys. This actually works better the other way, and I apologize. But if I set partial 1 to white noise and off, sounds like white noise. If I set it to sync and I set partial 2 to, say, a formant, that sounds pretty cool. So this is resetting, like, so right now on partial 1, the white noise is playing, but it's starting over every time the DigiWave 1 crosses over. So it gives it the character of the whatever we have on partial 2, but it's using oscillator 1 to, or it's using partial 1 to achieve the character of partial 2, which is really neat and a really cool effect, and you can certainly do it with like saw waves and stuff. And a great way to get just interesting sounding synths. So that's PCM Sync. All right, so next up is ring modulation. And ring modulation is just amplitude modulation. So on partial 2, when partial 2 goes up, when partial 2, all right, let's just see, get something nice. When partial 2 goes up, it raises the volume of partial 1, and when it goes down, it lowers the volume of partial 1. And this is good to make weird effects. Let me actually, it's a little bit louder, but then partial 2, right, we can go. That's that nice choppy sort of ring modulation sound. If you're wondering why amplitude modulation is called ring modulation, it's because a long time ago the circuits that were made to accomplish this feat were rings of diodes, which is kind of neat. If you look up like an old amplitude modulation or ring modulation circuit, you'll see that, and it's pretty neat. And I think it actually, the word comes from like the RF world. I think that probably predates its use in synthesis, but it's still really cool. So next is Xmod. And there are some videos on YouTube about what Xmod means. And to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. And in fact, Roland has used a few different things. Roland has called Xmod or crossmod a few different things. And that's why there's two different Xmod and Xmod 2 settings in the structure menu. But in any case, they both make cool sounds. Xmod 2, as near as I can tell, is basically FM synthesis. And I have an FM synth pack for the Roland MC101 and VerseLab and whatever else you might want that on. And it uses Xmod 2, and it works just like FM synthesis, which is to say, when partial 2, when you go up here, that raises the frequency of partial 1. So that makes a lot of weird, neat sounds. And again, you can do, actually, hold on. I'm going to go into Pro Edit. We're going to talk about Pro Edit in just a minute, but I think, yeah. Now you can really hear it, right? So yeah, so that's Xmod 2 is FM synthesis. Xmod sounds similar to FM synthesis to me. However, it does some wacky stuff, right? Now, I should mention Xmod and Xmod 2 only work with virtual analog selected here. I don't believe that they work with PCM Sync. Oh, I take that back. They clearly work with PCM Sync as well. So you can use the PCM Sync and the virtual analog for these guys as well. Nope, just Xmod 1. Xmod 1 works for PCM Sync. Xmod 2, which I believe is just FM synthesis, works for just the virtual analog stuff, which is fine. Usually FM synthesis, you only have sine waves anyway. I will mention, just because it's a curiosity to me, and I think that it's interesting, most of the time, at least in the synth world, when we say frequency modulation, we mean phase modulation. But that's fine because it has exactly the same effect. If you sort of think about, as one oscillator goes up, if you just take the other oscillator and shift it backwards as the first one is going up, that accomplishes exactly the same thing as frequency modulation. And that's just kind of neat. But that's all of the options. I hope that explained it well enough that you at least have something that you can experiment with. And yeah, I think this is just this is the first step of what makes Zenology Pro such like a cool synthesizer, is that you really you can just you can layer stuff. You can do all sorts of back and forth effects. With these stereo samples, you can do neat stuff. And you can really just get a lot going with not a lot to start. And even that I think is like a really cool sound, like just from the get-go. So let me talk for a little bit just about the Pro Edit screen. You saw me here for a moment. You can change all of the same stuff, but there are a few hidden parameters, and one of them is the Xmod 1-2 depth and the Xmod 2 1-2 depth, and that is like how much the Xmod is impacting the sound. So that's a nice thing to look at. This looks complicated, but you can just go like there's the common section, the structure section, and then you have all the other ones. The oscillator section, you can change different sorts of things from here. You don't get anything too much else going on here. We're going to cover the Pro Edit section much more in a little bit. But this is, I just want to let you know that this is what I was doing in the structure section, was where I changed the different settings. And you can also, there's also like the ring OSC 1 and OSC 2, and then the levels for the Xmod OSC 2. And what that means is you can blend the unmodulated signal with the original signal. If you want to do that, then it's almost like you have like 3 different oscillators going on. But I think that's it. I hope this was useful. I hope you liked it. I hope it was easy enough to follow. If you have any questions, don't forget to ask them in the comments. And yeah, stick around. I'm going to have a few more of these. The next video, we're going to cover modulations and filters. And then we're going to hit MFX and some other stuff in later videos. But anyway, hope that was good. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.